have a partner for peace on the other side. This is a tragic reality of failed leadership, a failed peace process, of failed negotiations, of non-implementation of agreements that were made in the past, and of repetitive violence. Someone said before about whether or not the acts of violence have not achieved more than negotiations. The acts of violence have achieved more than negotiations and killing hope for peace. They have not only killed thousands of people and destroyed tens of thousands of lives and homes and property, they've destroyed the hope that peace is a possibility, and this is part of the reality that we're facing. Israelis do want peace, they don't believe it's possible. Palestinians the same. The question about life in Jerusalem, normal life, football, can people go anywhere? People can go anywhere in Jerusalem, but there's a very clear geography of fear. People are afraid to wander beyond the zone which is familiar and their own domain. Israelis and Palestinians don't mix in places, even though they could. There's no physical barrier within the city of Jerusalem. There are barriers all around outside of Jerusalem that prevent people from entering. But within Jerusalem itself, people can go, but they don't. They don't interact. One of the few places that there is interaction, where there is a mixing, is in the hospitals. The hospitals in Jerusalem are places where Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Christians and Muslims, Jews and Arabs meet, where the doctors, the nurses, the staff are Israelis and Palestinians, because I guess when you're ill, when you're hurting, when your body is frail, there's no difference between who we are. We're all human and we all face the same illnesses. And in the hospitals, there's a kind of a modicum of normalcy that doesn't exist outside of the hospitals. There are a few examples worth pointing to that are maybe hopeful. There is a joint football team outside of Jerusalem, in Abu Rosh, a village outside of Jerusalem. There is a bilingual school in Jerusalem, which is part of an association of 8 bilingual Hebrew, Arabic-speaking schools, where there are 2 teachers in every classroom, a Hebrew-speaking teacher and an Arabic-speaking teacher, where the kids are 50% Palestinian, 50% Jewish. Most of the Palestinians there, not all of them are Palestinian citizens of Israel, but this is an example of where bridges are being built and new realities are being created. Lastly, to Noor, not all joint projects are created equal. What I mean by that is that I have advocated and continue to advocate joint projects for my entire life. I have never accepted the status quo of occupation. I have never normalized with occupation. Everything that I have done in my adult life of working for peace has been against the occupation, and I believe that the essential reality that we need to face is to rebuild the faith, the belief that partnership is possible, because the majority of Israelis and Palestinians don't believe that it is, and we need to challenge that reality. So we need to make statements like the one that you made. I would recommend not to make it a blanket statement across the board that all joint projects are bad and should be avoided and condemned and prevented. Not all joint projects are created equal, and a lot of them are created to challenge the status quo, to end the occupation, to create a Palestinian state next to Israel living in peace.
Thank you, Mr. Bershkin. Now over to Madam Hussein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think I would comment generally on all the questions that pertain to me. First of all, let me just share with you that I find the depth and the range of the questions very refreshing, in that all the issues that we as Palestinians feel are equally shared by many of you in this room. And that is very, very important for us as Jerusalem residents and as Palestinians. Let me just say something else. While the focus today is on Jerusalem, and I'm very happy that it is the focus, let us not forget Gaza, of course. And Gaza is an equal part of our fabric, and we hurt for their pain. And therefore, if it's not the discussion, the focus of the discussion today, it doesn't mean that it is not a sore point for us and remains to be so. All our issues, from Gaza to Jerusalem, to the cities of the West Bank in their entirety, without exception, are part of the entire fabric. And therefore, it is crucial for us to end this occupation and find a resolution. The resolution has been tried through so many sets of negotiations, as we have seen, and one unsuccessful set after the other. The nature of the agreements are interim and remain interim. We have not been able, as a Palestinian negotiator, to get the Israeli negotiator and the entire Israeli government on all levels of governments, from the initial Rabin government until today, to get the Israeli side to see the application of international law to this conflict. Israel presents the issues as political on a bilateral level. So long as they remain at that level without recognition of international humanitarian law as it applies, without the application of international refugee rights and the UN conventions, of course, and the law of occupation, and so forth and so on, we will not be able to get the issues squared away. If Israel insists to keep ignoring that applicability, then we will not have the necessary tools to set the conflict within the proper framework for a resolution. And that's why this suits Israel very, very well. And Jerusalem is at the core of that. Jerusalem is seen as an Israeli undivided city, and therefore any form of resistance that we aside from the negotiations, and we tried the negotiations, and again, because Israel chooses not to apply those sets of principles, and we cannot force them to do so. And when we have a broker like the United States who engages in what appears to be a neutral manner, yet fails to even get the primary issues to be set on an agenda, I think that demonstrates how biased the whole structure of the formal negotiations. So what is left to us? What is left to us is two sets of policies. One is the non-violent resistance that the PLO has espoused to recently, and that's going systematically by the very important step being recognized as a non-member state of the UN, joining international conventions, and presenting our arguments before the International Criminal Court. Steps like those are the kinds of steps that the PLO has taken to further further our interests, and with the hope and the dream, and we continue to dream, of course, to reach that two-state solution. On the two final points. One, to address the question related to the ISIS issue. I don't know about ISIS and the relationship that was mentioned. However, what I can say is that Israel the Zionist dream has been presented in many sources to be one that encompasses Eretz Israel, the larger Israel. Israel goes from the Nile to the Euphrates. I mean, those are published documents, and I think Israel understands the reality that the two-state solution would not take it in that direction. Finally, on the very core point of the Arab Peace Initiative, which was part of my presentation, and I omitted it for the sake of time, I think the Arab Peace Initiative was a very instrumental document that Israel has opted as a government and as a matter of policy to ignore to its own detriment in terms of its future relationship with Arab states. And therefore, when the Arab Initiative presents Jerusalem as the capital of two states, and in return for recognition, of course, of settling the entire conflict, of course, in return for Arab recognition, and that goes ignored by the state of Israel, I think this tells us all that Israel is not ready for peace.
Thank you, Madam. Mr. Nasrallah, I hope everything has been said.
Yes, I can skip. No, thank you. I just for Shahar question about the West Jerusalem, I think Mr. Khalid Tufakji can answer this better than any one of us because he worked on the documentation of all Palestinian property in West Jerusalem. And I think in the informal negotiations there was discussion about it, but mainly on the issue of compensation, I don't think the issue of right of return was raised in the context of West Jerusalem. So this is one. Two, I think what Ahmed said yesterday about the need for an active solidarity for Muslims and for others to come and visit Jerusalem, that's the best service for Jerusalem. And instead of having the I would say the brotherhood and the support and for the Palestinian demand, I think it's better that you visit Jerusalem and you consume the air of Jerusalem. That's the best service for Palestinians ever. So we have to shift our minds. And my third comment, I think it's about time to consider positive facts on the ground to empower the Palestinian right to Jerusalem, which is a one step to get to the political rights, which is for me in the medium long term. I would say in the medium term it's not possible, at least with this current Israeli government. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Husseini.
Properties in West Jerusalem is part of the compensation file, compensation for occupation file.
Thank you. This concludes our plenary 3 deliberations. On behalf of the committee, I would like to express our deep appreciation to the distinguished speakers who shared their knowledge and experience with us, and I'm sure they would need a round of applause from all of us. And many thanks also go to participants and who also contributed to the discussions through questions and comments and physical presence. Our meeting will continue shortly with a closing session. We will now suspend the meeting for around 10 minutes while we are preparing the room for the closing session. And to compensate your interim time, we will invite you for a tea break, and we will then resume the session for closing in 10 minutes. This meeting is suspended.